Hi, everybody. I am Dr. John Laird, and I am your host for this very special series on getting to the heart of cancer. My background is primarily as an integrative medical doctor. I've practiced comprehensive holistic medicine for over 40 years, and during the same time, I've been a student of the Sufi spiritual path, often called the path of the heart. And it's in that context that the title of the series is Getting to the Heart of Cancer. From the Sufi perspective, the heart, and we're talking about the spiritual heart, not just the piece of flesh in the chest, but the spiritual heart is really the key focus of our work. And you'll learn a lot about Sufism and the perspectives of Sufism in this series. But the key idea here is that the goal of the Sufi is to clean his or her heart of all of the ego and the toxic emotions, and for the heart to open to receive directly from the divine, from God, the higher spiritual lights. And how this would show up in the world, which is the key, is that the heart of this practitioner would carry deeply the qualities of compassion and love and mercy and peace and divine wisdom, divine insight, so on and so forth. So this is a path of the heart, and in our work, we aspire to get to understanding what is the heart of cancer. As you'll see from our perspective, cancer is a spiritual disease, actually a disease of the soul. And during this series, you're going to have the opportunity to listen to the conversations I've had with really remarkable people, healthcare practitioners who have spent 20 or 30 years working deeply with spiritual healing in general. And they'll be sharing their experiences and insights about working with cancer. We'll have interviews with patients who have faced this very challenging journey of cancer and have used many of the spiritual approaches that we'll share with you in this series. I want to say from the outset, our goal is not to create more Sufis in the world. We do have an aspiration to support anyone who wants to carry a heart of peace and love and mercy. We call this the message of unity. So that is close to our heart, and that's one of the goals of this series. The second goal is that you will be empowered to, in your spiritual life, however you define it, however you practice it, but that this series will support having the conversations in medical circles, professional circles, in family gatherings, wherever they need to be had, where spiritual perspectives, spiritual experiences really are given the credibility and the attention that they deserve. Too often it's written off by the professional class, if you will, as anecdotal or insignificant. And the reality is that when you talk with people intimately, as I have many times as a physician, the spiritual life of a person really carries much greater depth than a lot of the activities that are done in regular daily life. I know that's true for me. So in this series, we want to really support you in validating your own experiences. We have a website for this webinar where we are going to invite you constantly and repeatedly to share your understanding, share your perspectives, both sharing what you found of value in the episodes that we're broadcasting, but also what you find valuable in your own life and what your experiences have been with the journey of cancer. The second aspect of this, which is deeply personal to me, is that as a physician in practice for 40 years, I hadn't done a whole lot of work with cancer. I'd done cutting edge work in vascular disease and chronic fatigue and a variety of illnesses over the years that nobody could diagnose, nobody knew how to treat. But I hadn't had that much experience with cancer until several years ago. My wife was diagnosed with cancer, and it just hit me it just occurred to me as a death sentence. And I sobbed and cried and wailed, and honestly, I was terrified of the diagnosis, and I worked for many months to try to clear from my heart and from my brain all of the cultural pictures that what we call pictures in Sufism, the symbolic representations, all the meanings that we place on this simple word called cancer. If you've had cancer or anyone in your family's had cancer, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Our first interview will be actually with my wife coming up in a few minutes. But what I wanted to say was, once we had gone through really a couple of years of working on this and having it as a major focus in our lives, I sat back and looked at it a little bit more objective eye. You could say anything's objective in this these topics. But what I realized was this was one of the most blessed times in our life. My wife and I had a beautiful relationship. Our family had much love. And yet, as she said, before this started, our family loved each other, and by the end of the process, we cherished each other. And what I came to understand was that cancer is not a death sentence, and what this series is supporting is the understanding that cancer is a unique opportunity for deep healing and for love and transformation. And a lot of it has to do with just how we approach it. So it's in that spirit that we offer this series, and let's change the whole conversation around cancer and really look at all of the ways in which love, healing, and transformation is possible. So let's just jump right in with my first interview. We're going to begin our first episode with a very, very special guest who is my wonderful wife of 48 years, Nura Laird. Nura, welcome to Getting to the Heart of Cancer.
Thank you, Wadude.
We've been journeying for many decades, and I want our viewers to know that you bring so much rich experience to this. You're one of the co-founders of the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism. You're a co-founder of the Jaffe Institute, two of the organizations that are sponsoring this. You are a faculty member who trains people to be healers. You're the director of the master's program in Masters of Divinity and Peace and Mediation. And you wouldn't say this, but I will for you, that you're truly a master healer. You have master level skills in healing, all in surrender to God. But this is really who you are. You're a healer and a teacher and an incredible companion and wife and beloved. So I'm thrilled that we're starting our whole series with you, and I hope that's not too intimidating an introduction, but thank you for being willing to do this, and thank you for being willing to really look back at your own journey and our journey with cancer, because just looking back on that experience is not easy. And so thank you for your generosity, for being willing to go into this material. Thank you. So let's just jump in. What I remember is on Valentine's Day several years ago, you and we received a diagnosis that you had cancer, lymphoma, B-cell lymphoma. Let's just jump in there. How did it start? What was this like for you in the beginning?
Well, as you said before, it's not easy to go back to that time because, in a way, now I'm a new creation. But in the hospital, the diagnosis came after a biopsy, and the doctor came to see us, and I mean, there were so many feelings. One of them was shock, of course, and then fear. And I don't remember what else. Probably there was some level of this isn't really happening, what's called denial. I mean, I know that I knew it in my head, but there was a way that I wasn't ready to face it fully with my being. I wasn't really reaching out to meet it. But the doctor was so amazing, and he found out that we were Sufis, and he had some background knowledge in Sufism, and so he asked us what we do, and we told him a little bit about our healing work and our teaching and our university, and his response was to take my hands between his hands and to say to me, well, then we have to make sure that you stay around because the work you're doing in the world is too important to lose you. And I just get shivers every time I think of that. I mean, this was a regular oncologist, and it was just the best hoped for response we could have ever imagined.
We both started crying. He hadn't had any training in Jaffe healing, and he was an incredible healer.
Yeah, his hands are very healing. And that began probably a lifelong relationship with him, not just as doctor-patient, but for all of us as colleagues. Many people freak out when they have to go see their oncologist for follow-up visits or go to their cancer center for blood work. And I love going there. I went there yesterday for blood work, and I get to see my doctor tomorrow for a 6-month checkup. And I just look forward to it the way you'd look forward to seeing a close friend. So anyway, the early period was really hard in many ways. And, there were many states that I went through. And I think that the denial probably dissolved very slowly. Because in the beginning, when I started getting treatments, I didn't feel the effects of them very much. I was able to work. I got 6 chemos over a period. They were 3 weeks apart, so over a period of 4.5 months. So in the beginning, the chemo, I wasn't that affected by it, and so I was able to work 5 hours a day, almost every day during the 3-week cycle between treatments, and there might have been like 2 or 3 days where I couldn't work, where I just needed to rest. But as time went on, and I didn't realize this was going to happen, the treatments were cumulative, and then by the last 2 treatments, I was feeling the effects much more, and we'll get to some of the things that we did to help with the effects of the treatments, because John helped me a lot with that in all the different treatments he gave me.
Let's go back earlier than the treatments, because it was a very instructive story. You had a biopsy where they had to go inside the abdomen, and the tumor that was sampled was near your spleen. And I remember coming to the post-operative recovery room where you were, and I don't know if you remember this, but I sat down next to the gurney or the stretcher, and the nurses were, checking your vital signs as the anesthesia was wearing off. And I was holding your hand, of course, and you turned to me and you said, Wadude, that's my spiritual name. You said, Wadude, stop holding my hand. Put your hand on my heart, because that's where I'm focusing on my healing. Do you remember that? Really, it was amazing, because you were really, before the anesthesia had fully worn off, you were already focused on bringing healing to a place in your heart where you felt there was, I think you would call it darkness, and you wanted help and support doing that. And so I put my hand on your heart, and then when it came time for the stretcher to be moved into our hospital room, I remember going down the hall, having my hand on your heart as we're walking down the hall, and then continuing the healing as you got into the hospital bed. And you do remember some of that, as we were doing the healing there. Why don't you pick up the story as you remember it?
It was a very strong, what we would call, attack of the darkness after the biopsy. And it was very, very perceptible and specific. And I remember it was coming in from the left side of my head. And so I just asked him to do a healing on that. And we've been trained to heal on specific attacks from the darkness. And so he did the healing on it. And it didn't take very long. I think probably 10 minutes maybe. And it was gone.
It took about 40 minutes.
Oh, it did? Okay, I don't remember.
Well, let me fill in a piece, because I think this would be helpful for people. So you had a knowing that this was related to the cancer, just an intuitive knowing. And so, my experience was you were like jumping right on the deep spiritual healing at the same time that you were, taking care of business on the physical plane, getting a biopsy and so on and so forth. And what I remember was that I was behind you, and I had my hand on your heart. We were both sitting up in the hospital bed. I remember a doctor came in and looked at us and was kind of like, what is going on here? And you just said, without skipping a beat, we're saying some prayers right now. Can you come back when we're finished? And he went, oh, okay. And so, he left. And we continued for another 10 minutes. And I think because of your healing, your experience as a healer, you said that, this last piece really isn't clearing. We need some extra help. And do you remember you asked me to get on the phone? I guess you don't. So there was a meeting of our other faculty members, and you said, Wadude, can you, I don't know how you remembered that, but you said, we're having a faculty meeting right now. Could you call and ask them for help? And so I talked to Ibrahim or Salim. I don't remember which one it was. I think they were having a meeting. And I mentioned them because Ibrahim and Salim will be our next two guests on the program. But I said, we're doing a healing here, and can you help and support us? And within about 3 minutes of making that request, I put the phone down, obviously, and got back to you. Within about 3 minutes of making that request, there was this divine breeze, this divine healing light that just sort of swept through the room. And we both felt it. We didn't say anything, but then you said, you breathed a sigh of relief and said, it's left, it's finished, it's cleared. And I think then is when you received guidance specifically, and maybe you could share that, because that was kind of unique and special about healing.
I heard a very clear voice, audible, as if somebody was standing next to me, who said, the healing is now complete, and you have to walk through the physical part of it. And that was surreal, really. So it's interesting that that's the part I remember so clearly.
Yeah. That's a good thing to remember.
And throughout the process with chemo and all the healing that I received, I didn't have that memory up on the surface, but it was somewhere deep inside. And I don't know if that was the key that gave me hope. I'm not really sure, because it wasn't conscious all the time. Every once in a while I'd go, oh yeah, remember that voice, and that's what's happening. I'm walking through the physical. But I did feel a need to continue to do the deep healing, which is the spiritual part of it, or physical, emotional, whatever you want to call it. And I got healings every week on it. And I knew as a healer that cancer is associated with a lot of darkness, strong, darkness. And so I knew that I had to address that. And so we did in the healings. And I can't remember what all the specific issues were that we addressed. I remember a little bit generally, but it was deep work. And And it was recognizable to me, like I was at the same time the client and also knowing as a healer what's required. And I felt like I was doing that kind of work at that level. And
I remember.
it really felt like we were getting stuff out.
I remember that you had this sense of grace through the whole process that I think came from that initial healing. It's like in a deep level, a healing has occurred, and there's work that needs to be done on the physical, emotional level too.
Yeah.
It gave a sense of safety and hope, and a sense of accomplishment. And you really dove into your own issues, whatever came up. Maybe you can give a little, give people a sense of how you did that.
The way I like to work is from the body directly. And so I went into my spleen each time, or wherever I felt something, and also went into my heart. So each healing would open with a prayer. And for me, the prayer basically points you to where the healing needs to focus. It kind of opens up the place and the issue. And, so oftentimes it was my spleen and my immune system. It was lymphoma. And so it took me to all kinds of issues related to my relationship with my immune system. As if my immune system was a thing or a person that I was not in a good relationship with. And, what I uncovered was that, and the realization that I was, in a way, doing battle with my immune system in the sense that I wasn't trusting it. And it traced back to some early childhood experiences where I had to get a couple surgeries that were lymph tissue removed that kept growing back, and the doctors didn't know what to call it, and they called it autoimmune, but this was in the early 50s when they didn't really know what that was. And all of these things kind of came back up, and I was putting it together. And then I put it together with the fact that at a very early age, there were DDT planes flying over my house all summer, like 3 mornings a week, while the children in my home were all in bed, like at 7 in the morning, and they were flying low over the house, and we didn't have air conditioning. Our windows were open, so that smoke was coming in the house. And in the healings, it really became clear that the DDT had come in and was affecting my thyroid and my immune system. So I felt like there was a relationship there. So there was physical, environmental things that were going on, but there were also issues, like the issue of me versus my immune system and not trusting it. And I just had to get past that. I had a lifelong belief that I had a weak immune system. And that led to other underlying things that had to do with inner struggles where I wasn't whole and I wasn't at peace inside. My parts were battling with themselves. And so a lot of that was what we addressed, and it got resolved. And or mostly resolved. I think mostly. And probably 95%. And then there were other things I had to address about some of the situations in my life that were hard for me, and really dig deep. I had worked on these things before, but probably not enough. And so I had to dig very deep and find different dark places inside myself and just really ask God to help to clear them, to heal them and remove them.
Well, what were some of these issues?
What I remember the most was power stuff, issues that had to do with power. Either I was under the power of somebody else or I was over someone else. Either
so relationships and places in relationships that weren't.
Yeah. And parts of me that wanted power. Like, I think Elizabeth Kubler-Ross called it the inner tyrant. Things like that were, very strong voices of wanting to make things a certain way and wanting to make people a certain way and stuff like that. And even though I had worked on battles with God before in my healing process years ago, there was still some remnants of that too. It it's interesting because it didn't ever come up that I was mad at God for, quote, giving me cancer. For some reason, that's not how the cancer occurred to me. So the battles with God didn't have to do with that. But I do encourage people as a healer to see if there's any of that inside of them and to really walk through it and kind of normalize it, that it's not a horrible thing to be battling with God or to be mad at God, to just really meet it, greet it, and ask God to help you walk through it and heal it. And there were, along with the power, there were certain kinds of anger issues, and I don't remember exactly. It's funny, when something is healed, a lot of times it's so removed that it's as if you don't have it anymore. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that is very vague for me.
I don't want to bring that back, because as healers, once we know, if someone once cleared something, you don't want to go back and rummage around in the garbage, so to speak. I think but thank you for what you have shared. I think the theme here is that for you in your journey with cancer, and through the course of our series, we're going to be talking with multiple people who've had cancer, and they'll each be approaching it in their own unique way. For you, a key was to really find the qualities in yourself that were, in our work, we'd say need to be cleaned, whether it was power or anger, fear, judgment, whatever, what psychologists call the darkness within us, to clear that and to really face whatever there was in you that was unhealed or needed cleaning. So even though there's a spiritual grace around the whole thing, what strikes me about your journey is you were willing to go inside wherever you needed to go to find healing and to make it a journey of what we'd say in Sufism of purification.
Yeah, you have to really not be afraid to look at whatever's there, because those are all signs from God. God speaks to us partly through our body. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we need to really listen to the signs and see what is being asked here, what's being asked to be clean. And like you've mentioned a few times, the whole context of my journey with cancer was surrounded by grace and mercy and incredible love. I'm just amazed at how much my love quotient increased exponentially. It was really amazing because it wasn't anything that I did. It just happened to me. And I just felt so much love and mercy and gratitude most of the time. I mean, obviously, the times when I was really feeling physical symptoms strongly, the love and mercy and gratitude were more in the background, and I was struggling with the symptoms. But my symptoms were so much lighter than most people's are, I think largely because of all the prayers and the healing work and all the work that you were doing with me, the extra complementary things you were doing with me. But it was amazing how much I felt bathed in love and gratitude. I mean, I would stand back from it every once in a while and witness myself and say, this is really weird that I've got cancer and I feel this much love and gratitude.
I'd like to actually bring that forward as a theme for our whole series, which is that cancer is a unique opportunity for deepening love and for having healing and for having transformation. So on the one hand, it's a scary diagnosis. It's a potentially lethal disease process. Not everyone has a course like you had. Some people have much more difficult courses physically. Obviously many people die from cancer. But even so, no matter what the journey is, I think one of the takeaways for me is that this is an opportunity, an unparalleled opportunity in our lives, in anybody's life, to find more love, to have real healing, to have transformation. In a sense, the stakes are high, the motivation's there, but there's one way of looking at life in general is isness versus occurring. So the isness of cancer is what it is. It's a disease that has certain metabolic aspects and can be life-threatening. but how a disease occurs to us creates a major impact on what our journey is through it. If people feel that cancer is a punishment from God or is a result of something they've done wrong or they brought it on themselves, that's an occurring of the cancer, and that creates a lack of well-being and a lot of stress, and it makes things worse if you could. For whenever anyone goes through a difficulty in life, whether it's cancer or another illness or any difficulty, it's really important. It's like, well, how is this occurring to me, and what occurring context can I give it that creates something that has possibility, that has hope? And this is a way that you did that. That's part of what I'm hearing, and generalizing it to people who are listening to us, because they may say, well, my journey wasn't like that. But we can all look at, what's the occurring. So you took it as an opportunity for deep healing and deepening your reliance on God, and receiving and exploring what healing is possible here. Does that fit for you?
Yeah, the only thing I want to make clear is that the state that I was in of love and gratitude felt like it was a gift from God. It wasn't anything that I did. So many aspects of it didn't feel like things I did. That's all.
Did in spite of what I said, was there aspects of this that occurred to you as like, what did I do wrong that I got cancer?
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. I really looked at that. The way it occurred to me is, what have I missed in my healing process? What's still in me that I haven't cleared and transformed? Yeah.
Okay. I think it might be helpful for people if you could share. A lot of times we have sense spiritual healing is just opening to the light and feeling love. And actually, if you're working in the deep way that you did, the healing work is strong. It's maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because it's sort of a dichotomy of.
Yeah, it's not love and light and la-di-da, that kind of work. Well, our healing work in general, it's rooting out stuff that's in the unconscious. We have to be willing to really open and listen deeply and really pay attention to anything that comes up, subtle or not subtle, and address it. And we don't know in advance what's going to happen and what it's going to be like and where it's going to go. And we have to be really willing to ride the wave however Allah gives it to us. Yeah, it's very deep.
It might be helpful if you give people a sense of just sort of what the process is. If you're looking at a place of whatever you want, judgment or power, how does the healing process work? Just sort of as a basic introduction, you become aware that that's what you want to focus on, so that people get a sense of what Jaffe healing, what's happening, at least from your perspective, when you're doing this healing work, either on your own or with other people who are supporting you.
Yeah, so let's say you know in advance that it's judgment or power issues. Oftentimes you don't know. So again, I start with the heart and with the body, say a prayer, which opens things and brings things up to the surface so that we're aware of them, the healer, the client, and I. And then we listen. As the prayer opens that up, voices and pictures come up. So you start to hear things and you start to see things. And what you see are either memories or images that are symbolic of things that have happened or the state that things were in or are in. And the voices are either voices of things from memories or voices that resulted inside of ourselves that are a result of things that have happened to us. Either way, we need to pay attention to those. We have to really be slow and look at them and listen to them and just be present to them and wait patiently and ask Allah to come into those places where we hear those. And then while we're waiting, Allah sends light in the form of different qualities or just pure light or sounds. And we just wait and see what happens, and those things open. And sometimes when they open, we feel them more acutely. And sometimes when they open, they start to dissipate. And either way, that is the process. And so we just stay with the process, following it, not leading it, but following it. And just being true to it as Allah is creating the changes. And eventually, if we stick with it, it kind of subsides, it dissolves, it clears either all the way or part way, and we feel really, really different afterwards. We feel peace, we feel strong divine presence, we might feel love or mercy, and we see things differently. It's like whatever it is that we were focused on in the beginning occurs to us differently because veils have been removed, and so we're seeing not through our own veils, but more directly.
I think, yeah, absolutely. A couple aspects of that so that people understand. When you say the opening prayer, usually what we do is a prayer called the Fatiha, and we'll talk about that in a later segment and how that can open up guidance and open up healing. And when we're sitting a little bit further on, this is all done, first of all, with a direct focus on God and that God is the healer, and recognizing that God's the healer. It's not us that creates the healing. And our word for God is Allah. And there's many different names of God. And the key focus, though, is that your alignment is looking to God with expectation for healing, which is a major statement, and surrendering as deeply as possible. And then what helps create the opening are certain practices which we'll teach in this series. One is called remembrance. So when the recitation either out loud or inside of remembrance, at the end of this episode, we'll teach La ilaha illallah. These are specific invocations that have been found in this tradition to open the heart to receive healing. And so that light can actually come in and clear some of these qualities that you mentioned. So just wanted to give some context to our viewers and how this will fit into other parts of our series. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your journey and what was important for you?
I was just glancing at the notes that we made in preparation for this, and I want to mention something about grief. And this is from what I've learned about grief and something that we teach in the Peacemaking Masters. Grief can be caused by loss of somebody or something, like death, like an animal or a person. But grief can also be caused by another kind of loss, like loss of a job, loss of a home, loss of a marriage, or even something more abstract like loss of self-respect or loss of safety and security. Either way, no matter what level the loss is on, we enter a process of grieving, whether we identify it that way or not. And cancer is that kind of it creates loss of one kind or another. We don't know what the losses are going to be at the outset, but we know that we've lost whatever sense of health we thought we had before we got cancer. And of course, it makes you start to feel unsafe in the beginning because you don't know if you're going to die, you don't know if you're going to have surgery and lose things, you don't know if it's going to metastasize. There's just so many things that you don't know. So along the way, there are things that are lost. Maybe some abilities are lost, or some, I don't know, whatever. So some sense of safety in the world could be lost, especially if one doesn't have a strong connection with God. So in the course of this grieving process, a lot of things come up. Denial's one of them. That's like the first one. And then bargaining. Like bargaining with God, like if I just stop eating meat, or if I just eat raw food, maybe you'll make me better. If I just do this, all the different, people don't think of it as bargaining. They're just unconsciously thinking, maybe if I do this, maybe if I play it this way, I'll get better. So that's another stage. Another stage that I really want to focus on is anger. That's a stage of grieving. And it comes because of loss. And it's natural. And so if people are angry at the beginning in their diagnosis or during parts of their healing process, I just want to say that you can see the anger in the context of a grieving process. And it's not a bad thing. It's not bad to be angry. It's human. And it's human to feel all the different stages of grief. The thing that we need to remember is that we need to walk through the anger, see what comes up with it, ask God to help us to clear those things and get to the other side of it. So it's not denial, it's not pushing it under the rug, it's not pretending it's not there, it's meeting it, greeting it, and walking through it. And so I just wanted to say that because anger is so prevalent anyway. We have such a taboo, again, about anger in our culture. And when you're sick, you feel helpless, you feel embarrassed. I felt a lot of shame when I felt unable to take care of myself, or even being in pain made me feel ashamed, and I wanted to hide it, and I didn't want to tell you and the family how I really felt sometimes. And then sometimes I felt angry because of being helpless and not being able to do stuff that I normally could do. So I just wanted to normalize those things for people.
Thank you. I remember my loss, as I look back on this several years back, is I've lost an innocence. I think for me, it's like, will the cancer come back? Will I get cancer? I don't have innocence anymore. I'm so on guard and have, fears and concerns and so on and so forth, because there's a loss there for me.
Yeah, and it hangs over your head about, are you going to lose me?
Absolutely.
For both of us now, we're both 70-ish, and death is right here, with us. And the cancer really brought that home, that we have to face the fact that we could lose ourselves and or each other at any moment. And that's like an impending sense of loss that's with us now all the time. It should have been with us before, but,
Right.
Like you said, we were innocent. Now it's real.
Absolutely. What was it like working with, maybe share a little bit, what was it like working with, on a family level, impact on our daughters who are in their mid-30s, and just what that was like in the relationships that, how you work together with each of our daughters?
Well, I was so lucky because all of you and both of our daughters jumped in and were fully present. Like, I didn't feel like anybody wasn't present or was in denial or was avoiding me. Like, everybody was so right there, no matter what I was going through physically and no matter what emotional state I was in. And there were, and that's not true in some families. Some people might not want to really face this thing. And the other thing is that I have vivid memories of times where we were sitting down together, sharing what we were going through. And sometimes it was while I was getting an IV vitamin C treatment at home. So I was hooked up because I got those every day for a while. And we would just share what we were all going through. And some of us would cry, and we were just listening and being authentic with each other. And that happened at least 3 times that I can remember. And those were just precious moments. I was just so grateful that nobody was trying to shield anything from me, in terms of how it was impacting you all. And I was being real, and we were talking directly about, we don't want to lose you, and this is scary, and this is hard, and we wish we could help. And, I forget what all the things were that were said, but it just felt very real, and it was very bonding. The love in our family somehow exploded between us. It just exponentially increased and has lasted and just keeps growing. I mean, it was growing anyway, but somehow this cancer was the occasion for the love to just increase so deeply. And we had all kinds of hard conversations. I mean, we had been a family that tried to keep everything on the up and out anyway. But there were conversations that we hadn't had in order to just clear the air and make sure that everything got said just in case I was going to die, like that. So it was really amazing. And then our kids were both there for me. One of them, they're both healers, and one of them was there for me for coaching sometimes, and the other one was there for me practically every single week as my primary healer, which is amazing when I think about it. I mean, they're in their early 30s, and she's capable of putting on her healer hat and giving her mom healings on major darkness that her mom needs to clear. And she's able to do that and stay professional about it and not get herself involved. I just really was amazed at that. And then you were there for those middle of the night times when I would get caught by the darkness. There were certain times in the cycle of chemo where I would just get really, really caught in the middle of the night, and I'd be up for hours, and I'd wake up Wadude and he'd just give me a healing, and I'd be able to get peaceful and go back to sleep, and the darkness would go. So the family stuff was really crucial. I can't imagine people who have to go through this who don't have that kind of support system.
Well, we're in the process of wanting to create those opportunities for families, obviously through the Jaffe Institute. I think it could be a really interesting interview, maybe later on in the series, if we do a just interview with our daughters to see what it was like. But we have to finish up now, and I'd like to just finish up with, I remember what you said in terms of this explosion of love in the family, and what you said, a short while back was looking back on the whole process. You said, when this whole thing began, as a family, we loved each other, but now we cherish each other. And that really captured something very deep that happened. So thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, now looking back, I think the most important upshot of the whole thing was that Allah brought so much more love and mercy into my being that I can access now. And my lenses now are full of that. My lenses in seeing the world and myself as a healer. I feel like I had some of that before, but it's just increased 1,000-fold. And that's, again, not something I did, but I can see it in myself, and it's from God.
Sufism is often described as a path of purification followed by beautification. And that's a way of understanding what you just said. There are deep beauty that can come out of this. Yeah.
I don't take any ownership for it.
I understand.
It's from God, but I can see it. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you very, very much for this discussion. And you'll be coming back in other episodes in our series. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wadude. It's my pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview and find much value in it. I love my wife, and she's amazing. She really walks her talk, and when she's got issues, she dives into them deeply, and that's really one of the messages that we found, is that in the journey of cancer, it really requires the deepest inner work. It's not just about changing an emotional state, but it's about really going in and transforming what needs to be transformed so there can be complete healing. So I did go ahead and interview my daughters, and that interview is posted on our website for this webinar series. They are two amazing young women, and both very different and very unique, both healers in their own right. That's proud daddy talking. And I think you'll enjoy that interview. Secondly, my wife Nura mentioned the practice of remembrance. It's one of the key spiritual practices in the Sufi tradition. Remembrance means to remember. You could say remember oneself, to bring one's members all back together. It is also a process of remembering our deep and original connection with the divine. So on our website, we have the website of the webinar series. We have a recording that I made that teaches about the remembrance and also has a guided process of remembrance, so you can undertake and do this that spiritual process yourself. In Sufism, we say what really matters is to taste the experience, not just talk about it. So if we could be in person, I could work with you on these things more individually. And so the webinar series has the disadvantage that we're not together in the same room and working with some of these practices. But anyway, hopefully this will give you a taste. With the time we have left for this first episode, I want to introduce you to Robert Ibrahim Jaffe. Ibrahim is a dear friend and colleague of mine for the last 25 years. Really more than anyone I know, at least in our organization. He has really dedicated his entire life to understanding the healing processes. Before he ran into, really before he actually did this interview, I'm sure he's done at least 50,000 healings on people over the last 35 or 40 years. He has a lot of experience. He has deep insight and a beautiful ability to describe what what he's experiencing and what his particular insights are. In this very short interview, we'll have a chance to get to know him a little bit, to introduce him, and also he's going to share very personally what it was like when his wife was diagnosed with cancer, and how painful and frustrating it was for him years ago when he realized that, in spite of all of his experience at that time, he didn't really have the necessary insights and understandings for how to work with cancer more effectively. Insights which you'll see readily over the course of the next episode or two. He's come up with some really profound understandings of the cancer process. So let's just jump into that interview. We're now in Dr. Jaffe's office in Northern California with Ibrahim. Ibrahim, thank you for joining Getting to the Heart of Cancer.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Let's jump in and share with our viewers how you got started in Sufism.
Okay. Well, my story is, as you know, is that I was very sick with something called congestive heart failure. And apparently I had picked up a virus, and the virus was affecting my heart. And I found myself getting very sick and unable to walk and unable to breathe, and the symptoms that congestive heart failure has. And I was praying about it, and I realized that I was actually dying, and that here at 36 years old, and my time was over, and I was actually a healer myself, and I couldn't heal that process, which was very discouraging. And of course, the system that I had worked with was more of a kind of an energy-based system, a chakra system, so it left me kind of really at a quandary. Why can't I actually heal this illness? So when I began to think about it, I realized that my issue was the heart, and that what I had learned was more about the mind and sight, but I hadn't really learned the secrets of the heart. And I realized that I really needed a heart master. I needed somebody who really understood the heart, somebody who really could heal the heart. So I began looking for that person. And then I heard about a man named Sidi, Muhammad al-Jamal, who was supposed to be a very high Sufi master from Jerusalem. And I thought, okay, let me go out and see him. So I heard he was coming to the United States, and I flew out to meet him. And I walked in, and the first thing, he looked in my eyes and said hello, and then said, you're dying. And I said, how did you know? And he said, when you know God, you can know anything. And that was very oppressive to me, like the level of knowledge at that moment was very strong. And I said, so can you ask God how I can live? And he went inside for a long time and came out and said that the answer was that I had learned my spirituality through my mind, but I hadn't learned it through my heart. And that really I had to learn to love and move through my heart. And I had to drop everything and start again and learn how to move spiritually through my heart. So I said yes. I took initiation as a Sufi with him, and a year later my heart was perfect, and I had healed it, and basically considered it, in my opinion, he saved my life, and I felt very obligated in the sense that he had really given me my life to really learn these teachings.
Beautiful. Part of your story that I remember, just going backwards, is you had a premonition that you were going to die in 6 months, right before you even heard of CD. And so when you came to him and he said, isn't there something part of the story he said, you have 6 months to live? That was his opening line to you?
That was pretty, yeah, I had it's a long story how I had the sense of that I had 6 months to live, but through the energy work there was a way of knowing that. And when I walked in, the first thing he said was, "You're dying, you have 6 months to live." And that was part of his gnosis, which again, what for me was very impressive, because somebody who could have that level of knowledge about my illness might be able to have the knowledge about how to heal me.
And then didn't he say, but you didn't understand God's message completely?
Yeah, he's talking about
What
that.
did he say? You have 6 months to live, but if you change.
If you change, exactly.
And that's how your question came. What do I got to do to change?
Exactly. If you change, yeah. And the change was to live from my heart and not from the mind, which I think in the West we really, we've learned to live in our minds and learned to really produce from our minds. But in really, I would say, even from more mortality rates in the West, that second largest cause of death in the U.S. is heart disease. So that's a major statement that most of us have forgotten how to live in our hearts.
And our whole series is taking place as cancer is becoming more and more the common disease in our culture.
Exactly.
Worldwide, actually. So
exactly.
We'll get to that probably later in our conversations. So here you are in Sufism.
Yes.
I do want to put in that I remember CD asked you to really set aside your whole healing system, like just let it all go. And first of all, I want to acknowledge you for that, because at that time in your life, the system you were using, you were very successful and had hundreds, probably thousands of students. And to really let that go is often what's asked for in spiritual traditions. And I think in Sufism, it's letting go again and again and again and again. But I want to acknowledge you that you were willing to just let it go and pursue this particular truth that God was bringing to you at this time, and you're willing to do that. So.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's part of a spirituality that people don't realize. We want to hold on to who we are and how we are. It's like we want to be who we are. We want to kind of grab a fruit of spirituality, but stay who we are. But I think if we really are going to change and heal, we have to really, literally die to who we are and become reborn in a new way. Which for me meant leaving, sort of the Eastern spiritual processes of healing, which were very effective, and trying something different that in this case came out of the Middle East, which was a more, I would say, centered almost, in the sense that it carried the heart. It was more of the middle as opposed to an extreme in a certain way. And, I think when you're facing death, all of a sudden you make choices that are a lot easier. There's no kind of, you can't really hold on, because if you do, you just die. So you have to make the change. It forces you to do what you may not want to do.
And we hear that again and again and again from cancer patients, because it's considered a death sentence almost by the culture. And so death is right up front and center.
Yeah, and I think that people this is one of the reasons I actually love working with cancer myself, is that when somebody is in the death process or facing death, all the fight to be right or to stay as we are goes out the door because we know it doesn't work and we have to try something new. And the beauty is that is it gets rid of all that resistance and allows us to be very vulnerable and sincere and open to possibilities that we hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. And these are your understandings that are developing now for you. You had cancer impact your life very deeply years ago when it was different. Tell us a little bit about what your journey was.
Well, as you know, I had my first wife died when she was 47, and she had a very, very sudden onset of stomach cancer. We were hiking in the Grand Canyon, actually, and she started saying, I feel really sick, I need to leave. All of a sudden she started throwing up blood in the Havasupai Falls, and we ended up flying a helicopter down to pick her up. We flew back up, drove to the hospital, and shortly after she had endoscopy, and they found fairly extensive stage 4 cancer in her. This is again many years ago, and it was shocking. For me it was shocking in that, one, that I just hadn't perceived it, and secondly that it came on so quickly, and thirdly that even as a healer I really had absolutely no idea how to handle or heal something of that magnitude. And we had done many healings. We had probably 30, 40,000, 50,000 healings of many diseases, but not something like an aggressive stage 4 cancer, and stomach, which is many people consider, untouchable.
It's tough.
It's a tough one. So, I, called City, our guide, and I said, she's got cancer, what do you do? And he said, he just kind of shook his head and he said, there's nothing to do for her right now. You can only pray for her. And we did and prayed, and it didn't change her outcome, and she died 3 weeks later. So it was a very, strong experience for me personally, and for my young children at the time. I was left with a 10 and an 8-year-old, so they had to kind of walk through not having a mom, which was hard. But one of the things it did for me was it left me with the question mark, like, I don't want to be caught like this again. I don't want
Caught,
to,
meaning
just blindsided, that cancer shows up, I don't know what to do, it's too late, it's a death sentence, it's over, which is what, people believe in many situations, and in this case, what happened for her situation. But I made a decision in my heart that this was not going to happen again for me, that I was going to learn to really be able to perceive more deeply the presence of cancer. I would start looking for the patterns of cancer that showed up in the light and in the consciousness, and start to look at ways of healing it. And it wasn't something that, I didn't go out and I'm going after cancer. But it was something that I began watching with all my students, and I began looking, and of course over the next period of years we had a lot of cancer show up. So I began really watching and learning about cancer. And of course eventually my mother came down with lung cancer, and she had been a smoker, and of course she got cancer in the mediastinum. And I remember she wasn't really open to healing. She just wanted her chemo and radiation, and of course it didn't do anything. And I remember we were kind of reaching the end of the stage with her, and we were sitting in the ICU at Kaiser Hospital, and she was dying. At that point she had lung, she couldn't breathe, so her oxygen levels were very low, and she was in coma. And so she was in the ICU when her brother came to me, who absolutely adored her. And her brother said, Ibrahim, can you do anything? I will do anything. He said, I will be a believer in God if you can heal this. Which you should never challenge a Sufi that way. So I kind of prayed about it. I said, all right, well, what can I do, is there anything I can do? Because I wasn't really doing anything except kind of waiting for her to go.
Because she wasn't really open to whatever you would give.
Exactly.
Okay.
She wasn't open, and it felt like a little bit like a violation, like by healing somebody who doesn't want to heal, you're kind of violating their personal will. So I said, if the brother is asking me, she's in coma, I think that's, is a sign of something. What can I do? And with that, this knowing came upon me, which is, use the 99 names of God. So I began with a chart, which you can't see on the camera, but it's on the wall over here. And I began literally bringing in those names.
A chart of all the names of God, sort of like your menu, your spiritual menu.
Exactly.
What you can choose from. And they all have good carrots and nice hearts on them, and they're all good.
They're all good. They're all, I think you've all heard of them. I mean, they're, and I began bringing the lights of those names into the light of her tumors. And I ran through them. It took me about 4 hours to do it. I really didn't know what was going to happen, but I did bring the lights in, and I did help them to integrate
through invocation and prayer and
recitation, like that. And it was very strong. It was powerful. I mean, in a moment when a person's dying, there's such an openness. It was very powerful. And I tell you, those names went in. And when I reached, it wasn't the 99th, it was like the 91st or something. Something happened. There was like this, I don't know, the light began to shake somehow. And all of a sudden we start to hear movement in the other room, because we were out outside the room.
Oh, you weren't bedside with her, you were
I was
next door, so to speak.
Yeah, I was she was in the room and I was sitting outside in the hallway in the chair, because I don't know, it was just too painful to sit in there with her at that point and be with that. So as I began bringing those names in, the movement started happening, and we both ran out to the room, and sure enough, she's sitting up in bed. She's looking for her oxygen, which had fallen off. Her oxygen levels were down at 60 or 50, and all of a sudden she's looking for her oxygen. She puts up on her oxygen and asks for where's her dinner? Why did she fall asleep, and why did they forget her dinner? And her brother, Chet, and I looked at each other, and he said, okay, I'm a believer now. And I said, great. And she lived for quite a while after that.
Really?
Yeah, for several years.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh. And what was your takeaway, before we complete, our conversation today? What was your takeaway from that?
The power of the names of God. That the names of God have incredible power beyond anything that I'm capable of understanding, and that these are the tools of the spiritual doctor, and that we need to learn to use those tools as any doctor would use medicine, or a surgeon would use what they use. These were the spiritual doctor's tools. And this became, for me, the quest that from that point forward, I said, I'm going to learn these names, and I'm going to learn to use these medicines and find out how they work.
Well, I think that's how we're going to start our next conversation for our next episode. Thank you for this great introduction, and I look forward to continuing our talk.
Good stuff. Beautiful. I'm so glad that you joined us for our first episode. Remember, on our website, we have the interview that I did with my two daughters, Sarah and Camila. And also there's a recording, a teaching that I've given on the Sufi practice of the remembrance, which is something you can start using right away. There is instruction and a guided process that you can follow readily. Also, join the conversation, as I said. There's a place on the website where you can share your reactions to what you heard today, and contribute any of your own insights and understandings about this spiritual journey of cancer that we're investigating so much. The next episode is amazing. We're going to have the entire episode will be with Dr. Jaffe, and he'll be sharing in depth some of the understandings and insights that he's had. We're looking at what does it mean in the Sufi tradition to surrender to God, and what happens when you surrender to God, and what healing is possible. And he has a really amazing case, the history story of a woman with breast cancer who really took that practice to heart. We'll be looking at how can one go deeper than just the usual understandings that our self and our ego carry. How can we go deeper into the issues as they're held in the soul and begin to unlock those issues and bring healing at the level of the soul? We'll be looking at what are the emotional and spiritual toxicities that we're finding in our work with cancer patients. So there's so much more to come. Join us in our upcoming, our next episode. Thank you very much for joining us. I look forward to being with you again.